This podcast is part of the Big Heads Media Podcast Network. Go to bigheadsmedia.com for more great podcasts.
Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of Cooking with Grief, the comedy podcast where we share weird, wonderful facts about the world around us, and anything from history to art to science and to funny articles about Uranus, astronomical or otherwise. As ever, I'm joined with my co-host from another mother and father, because we are completely unrelated, but we do both share the same first name, which has no bearing on familiar ties. It's Chris.
Hello. What a unnecessarily complicated introduction. And that's coming from me.
It's coming from a man who once made the intro a multiple choice phone menu.
Automation's coming for us all.
Indeed. So besides that, how are you?
I'm good. I'm full. Very full.
Full of what?
Vim, vigour, and eggs.
Back on the strongman diet, that imply that you've got somewhere to lift weights now? Because my gym's still closed, so I'm
working out from home, but also it's more, during lockdown, I put on so much weight from eating ice cream and crisps. While pleasurable, the benefit of the strongman diet, I'm limited to like eggs, chicken, beef, and spinach and broccoli. And that's pretty much it. So I had 10 eggs for my breakfast, and I'm feeling full, but ready to deliver some great content.
As ever, Gaston looks on in amazement.
How are you? What are you full of?
I am well, and I am full of the milk of human kindness. I'm joking that I can't. But I'm okay, I guess. Full of dreams and hopes and whimsy. Anyway, with the obligatory pleasantries out the way. I mean, I assume this is how normal people have conversations. We don't know. We're still learning.
Good morning. What are you full of? Cornflakes?
Yeah, dear listener, what are you full of? Let us know in the comments. I'll tell you what I am full of. I'm full of bloody hay fever. I'm not. So yeah, if I sound bunged up or start sneezing or anything like that, it's because the plants are attacking me. I hate summer. I love summer, but I hate summer. Just plants. Just why did they do this to me?
We're 3 minutes in. At some point, we're going to tell them what the podcast's about.
Yes, well, I was going to do it now. Now that once again, the obligatory introduction's out of the way. The way the podcast works, for any new listeners that have stumbled upon us, is we've both got two topics about something weird, something interesting, something obscure that the other person hasn't heard before, and then we surprise both each other and, by extension, you, the audience, with our knowledge and, well, I say knowledge, our initial, offering of information, and then little follow-up wisdom.
Our reading comprehension of a clickbaity headline followed by zero academic research to follow it up.
Exactly. And without further ado, over to you, Chris, for your first topic.
Okay, so for my first topic, I'll start off with a question. Chris, what is, in your own words, Stockholm Syndrome?
Oh, I know this one. When you fall in love with your captors.
Good answer. Would you be interested and eager for more information if I told you that Stockholm Syndrome was originally a completely fabricated diagnosis?
What?
So this comes...
Well, yeah. Tell me.
Okay, I will.
I forgot to answer your question.
So this comes from Jess Hill's book, See What You Made Me Do, about domestic violence. Stockholm Syndrome is, quote, a myth invented to discredit women victims of violence by a psychiatrist with an obvious conflict of interest, whose first instinct was to silence a woman questioning his authority. What I mean by that is the psychiatrist who invented Stockholm Syndrome, Niels Bergerot, never actually spoke to the woman he based it on.
Oh, I mean, that's spurious research even for us.
Exactly, yeah, it makes us look good. So it came about, so the history of it is it was during a bank heist that inspired the syndrome, and Bergerot was the psychiatrist leading the police response, i.e. he was the authority that Kristen Enmark, who was the first woman diagnosed with Stockholm Syndrome, so distrusted. In 1973, she was working at a bank when Jan Olsen, who was the robber, came in and took her and 3 other clerks hostage, and there was a stalemate for the next 6 days. Now, like, the Swedish police hadn't really seen this sort of activity before in the 70s, and it became a big media event. It's essentially a Hollywood blockbuster come to the sleepy streets of Sweden.
Some nice alliteration there, but carry on.
Thank you very much. Completely intentional, of course. And because they hadn't seen this thing before, there was no training in, like, hostage negotiation, and the sort of whole process was pretty bungled from the start.
I mean, as far as I'm aware, like, the correct hostage negotiation technique is for a grizzled detective in a trench coat to walk up with a loudhailer and ask if the guy wants some pizza.
Yeah, exactly. We know that now, but in the naive days of the 70s, it was just like, what are you doing?
There goes all our Swedish listeners.
By one Swedish listener. Thanks for sticking with us for 45 episodes of nonsense until we turn the gun on you. So early on in this bungled operation, they misidentified Olsen, who was the shooter, and they thought they'd found his younger brother and sent in what was essentially a random teenage boy, in to negotiate, accompanied with the psychiatrist Niels Bergerot. That didn't work because he was a complete stranger, and when that failed... Sorry, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, like, who approached who in this situation?
I don't think...
Hey, do you have a brother? Yeah, that'll do.
I don't think the kid, like volunteered, like, oh, I'm his brother. All right, okay, right, you go in. Can I have a bulletproof vest? Nay. I don't know who approached it. I'm guessing that they looked up, like, on the bad guy database, got the wrong guy, tracked down his brother, and were like, can you go in? And he's like, oh, got nothing better to do apart from eating herring. Sorry, Swedish listener. So when that failed, the police and the robbers started trading fire. Meanwhile, one of the other bank robbers, a guy called Clark Olofsson, was trying to reassure the hostages, and Kristen Enmark, who was the woman involved, later recalled that, quote, Clark comforted me, he held my hand. He said, I want to see that Jan doesn't hurt you. I can't say that I felt safe, because that's not the word, but I chose to believe him. I thought that someone cared about me. This is in contrast to the police. Bergerot refused to speak to her or any of the other hostages, and they managed to get a radio in, and she did a radio interview from inside the bank, and Enmark said, the police are playing with our lives, and they don't want to talk to me. Who is the one who will die if anything happens? It was such a big media event that she got to phone the Prime Minister, Olof Palme, because I guess that's just a thing that happens in 1970s Sweden.
Probably was watching it on TV.
And she told him, I fully trust Clark and the robber. I am not desperate. They have not done a thing to me. On the contrary, they have been very nice. What I'm scared of is that the police will attack and cause us to die. She was told that they couldn't give in to the demands of the criminals, and that if she died, at least she'll have died at her post, which is pretty appalling thing to say to someone in a situation.
I know, when you say, like, died at their post, it's usually, like, you know, like a soldier defending, you know, like a vital, like,
supply line, yeah.
Like, he died at his post valiantly, not, like, died at his desk.
Yeah, went to work and just happened to get caught up in this thing. So she told him that she didn't want to be a dead hero, which I think is fair enough. Mm-hmm. It ended after 6.5 days when the police tear-gassed the bank and then captured everyone and then paraded the captured robbers up and down the street for the media and the crowd that had gathered. And because there was so much media attention outside, they wanted to bring Enmark and the other hostages out on stretchers to sort of play up for the cameras, and she refused, saying that she walked into the bank and intended to walk out as well. So that's the sort of story of the actual bank robbery itself. Now, the sort of Stockholm Syndrome bit comes after. So in the subsequent media frenzy, she criticised the police response and curled out Bergerot personally. He dismissed her comments as a product of Normanstrong syndrome, later renamed as Stockholm Syndrome. He explained how her irrational fear of the police was caused by emotional and sexual attachment she had with her captors, and this diagnosis was completely improvised on the spot, but it suited the media sort of narrative. And and one newspaper quoted Enmark as not appearing as traumatised as she ought to be. So they sort of bought this media narrative.
How dare you be dealing with this well?
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, and later she said, yes, I was afraid of the police, but what is so strange about that? is it strange that one is afraid of those who are all around, in parks, on roofs, behind corners, in armoured vests, helmets and weapons, ready to shoot? So the psychiatrist just made up this definition, and then it sort of formed the model for, well, ever since. So in 2008, a review of the scientific literature around Stockholm Syndrome found that the vast majority of its cited cases were made up by the media, not by psychiatrists. So it's almost like it sort of got into popular culture as a reference point, but there are very few cases of it actually being true in real life. And the problem with that is that these days it mostly refers to domestic violence cases. And the problem with the initial diagnosis is that it became the model for what was then called battered woman syndrome, or learned helplessness.
Stockholm Syndrome sounds a lot nicer than that.
It's almost used as an excuse, you know what I mean? Like, it sort of discredits victim of violence, so it addresses the wrong person in the relationship. So it's like, if, like, a bloke... And I know it isn't exactly the most comedic topic we've ever done for a comedy podcast, but I thought it was interesting that... Well, it was interesting enough to not be funny, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
That, like, if there's, like... a bloke domestically abusing his partner, it's weird that we, as a society, we put the emphasis on, like, oh, why didn't she leave him? Mm-hmm. Like, oh, she must be, like, too emotionally attached to him. And it's like, it's just such a weird angle to take to it. But I just thought it was interesting that this thing that, you know, most people have heard of Stockholm Syndrome, most people know what it means. But literally the first case of it is like, Kristen Enmark has this really traumatic experience, but finds fault with the police. And the psychiatrist just goes, well, you know, she must have, you know, what, did she fancy her captives? And all the media go, yeah, that does seem more likely. You know what I mean? Like, do you like him? And it's like, I don't know. I just thought it was interesting.
But there is a thing, though, like, when people are in, like, abusive relationships, or, I don't know if it also applies to hostage situations, but there is a thing where, like, if you're shit to somebody and then show them a small act of kindness, people will, like, fixate on the kindness, you know, and use that to justify the rest of it. Like, it is definitely obviously, like, the Stockholm thing sounds made up and stuff, but there is definitely, like, some psychological thing there where, like, if you're... You know, you can be a dick to somebody 90% of the time, but you throw them 10% of the time, you, like, do something nice. People will grab onto that.
There's also a psychological phenomenon called the halo effect, where good first impressions can far outweigh, you know, the actual benefits of those first impressions. So, like, if someone gets in a relationship and everything's great at the beginning, you get that halo effect where they can do no wrong, then things go sour. Then we're more willing to forgive people for later transactions if they can, you know, if those first impressions were really happy memories. I mean, it's the same at work. Like, the first, like, few months or whatever, you're an absolute grafter and you put in the shift and then slack off. People are more willing to forgive it than if you, like, for whatever reason, have a rough few weeks and then you sort of get that target of, oh, they're not a hard worker or they're hard to work with or whatever it is.
Slightly related fact, for some reason in the film Die Hard, little known obscure indie flick,
really shouting out the little man.
Yeah, there's this bit where, because obviously it's about a hostage situation, and there's a bit where the, like, news crew are like, the hostages might be suffering from Helsinki Syndrome, which is when you fall in love with your captors, and then they're like, yes, Helsinki, which is in Sweden. And I don't know if it's like a mistakenly part of the writers, or because obviously Helsinki's Finland and it's not called Helsinki Syndrome. Like, it's harder to make that up accidentally. Like, it'd be easier to say Stockholm, which is in Finland, accidentally than it would be to find a different Scandinavian city and make up a syndrome. And the character saying it is a bit of a knobhead, so it could be like this guy's an idiot.
Or maybe they meant, like, of course, the hostages may be suffering from Helsinki Syndrome. They've invented Molotov cocktails and they're attacking the Russians.
Well, and that's exhausted my knowledge of Stockholm Syndrome anyway.
So that's the end of my first topic. Chris, what have you got for your first one?
Okay, well, here's a question for you. How long do you reckon you could survive in a boat, in the ocean, with no supplies, no steering or anything like, literally just essentially shipwrecked?
Mentally, not long at all. It's out in the sun and I don't do well in that, and I can't imagine me fashioning some sort of floating palm tree shade to stay cool in. In terms of just sort of body mass, I've got a lot to keep me going. I've got plenty of blubber reserves, but mentally, not very long at all.
Mentally, a couple of hours.
I reckon 40 minutes.
Take me ocean.
My phone would still have charge on it where I go, sod it.
This is just too much. It's like you're not even out the harbour yet. I can't do this.
I can see land, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to swim. 3G, not 4. Fuck this. Dead.
Yeah, no, I'd be similar. But a guy in 2012, a man survived for 14 months, basically, on a little boat. I was going to say on his own. He didn't start off on his own, but eventually he was the sole survivor.
Oh.
Because this week we're cooking with grief, we're really going to focus on the grief.
And depending on what happened to his boat partner, maybe cooking as well?
Surprisingly not.
Oh. I don't know why I'm disappointed by that.
Yeah, no, I thought he would have. I mean, I'm not going to say this guy's not telling the truth, because he probably is, but I wouldn't begrudge him if it turned out that he did eat his fellow sailor, but apparently he didn't. So this is the story of Salvador Alvarenga. I don't speak Spanish, so apologies if I'm butchering that pronunciation. But he's a man from El Salvador, but he moved to Mexico, and then he was a fisherman. One day, obviously being a fisherman, he went out fishing, and he had a little boat. By the sounds of it, it was literally one of those ones, that's little more than... It's got like a motor on it.
Like a dinghy.
That was it. Not quite a dinghy. It's like wooden boat, but like the open-topped ones, it didn't have any it didn't have a wheelhouse or anything like that. Like you weren't supposed to be going... There was no indoors, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. It was one that you go out for a few hours and come back.
Life of Pi style without the tiger.
Yeah, basically. It was not meant for going out for more than a day. Designed to, you go out to the sea, you do your fishing, you come back in the evening. That's it. So Salvador was going, and then apparently what happened was he was supposed to go with his normal fishing partner, but then his usual partner bailed at the last minute. So he took over this guy called Cordoba, who was the guy from the area, who he didn't actually know, but he needed somebody else to go, and this guy was willing to work. So took him out in his boat. Apparently they'd never even spoken before, but this guy who bailed was like, my friend will work instead. So off they go, off the west coast of Mexico, out into the Pacific Ocean. They're out to sea. A storm came out, and it completely battered the boat. So they were basically trying to, they're spending all the time trying to, steady the boat, essentially. Because, like I say, it's one of those ones with... It's not exactly like a ocean liner or something. It's literally little tiny thing getting battered by waves. So they're literally there with buckets trying to bail all the water out. And then all the things they had that they didn't need, they ended up having to throw off, to try and keep balanced. Mm-hmm. So they threw out the catch they'd made. They threw out all their fishing equipment, stuff like that, because it was all just too unsteady and sinking them basically. But they did have a GPS device, and they did have a radio. So as I say, they weren't unprepared. Mm-hmm. But it turns out they were incredibly unlucky.
Yeah.
They're trying to get back to shore through this storm, and then the motor breaks. So now they've got no way of steering. But it's alright, because they've still got the GPS and they've still got the radio. But then the GPS stopped working, so they couldn't tell anybody where they were. And obviously they were out of sight of shore at this point, so it's... Look for a landmark. It's all blue. Wavy. He reckons they were about 2 hours from land at this point, but he radioed his boss, and he was and he said we're stuck. The motor's not working, and we're out in this storm. And I was like, don't worry, lay an anchor, what's your GPS? And that's when they get the GPS out, and the GPS is now broken. So they're can't really tell you. And then that was it. His last words over the radio were, come now, I'm really getting fucked out here. And then the radio died.
Strong last words to hear.
No, exactly. If you're going to go out, at least went out without, any sort of pretense.
Yeah.
So then, they were essentially on their own. These two guys in a boat. The storm was still going. The storm lasted for a good few days. And so they spent the entire time, trying to bail out this boat for, a good few days. And then they tried to make they call it, a sea anchor, because they didn't have, an actual anchor. But it's you string a load of buoys from the back of the boat, and it sort of works as a counterbalance, so things, the waves don't mess you about as much. Yeah, so that was it. So now they were just floating, essentially at the mercy of the currents now. They had a refrigerator icebox thing which they used to keep the catch in, and like they'd emptied that, and then they huddled in there, like that became the sort of their room, their indoors bit. And apparently they were freezing because they were covered in water in this storm. So, I mean, you have to be cold when like the ice box is the place where you go to warm up. Like,
yeah.
And even though they're fishermen, they'd thrown away all like the bait and the hooks and everything, as part of this and their previous catch. So to survive, they were like catching fish with their hands. Bear in mind, this is shark-infested water, but they literally like lean over the boat, just grab fish with their hands. And they also were able to catch turtles.
The criminals of the sea. I take it they can't cook anything, so they're eating raw fish.
Raw fish. They're drying the fish in the sun.
And raw turtles? What are they doing with the...
Raw turtles, drinking the turtle blood for water. And bear in mind, we're only 2 weeks in. Eventually it started to rain again, and more gently this time. They collected rainwater. They're floating further and further away, literally just into the Pacific Ocean. They're just heading pretty much on a straight line away from the shore. But weirdly, there was apparently quite a lot of rubbish in the ocean, and some of it actually had food that you wouldn't eat in normal circumstances, but they were.
Better than fingernails and turtle blood.
Yeah, exactly. Rancid milk or stuff, they were like, oh, that'll do. I don't know, I always just assumed turtles would be quite hard to catch. I don't think they'd swim right up to you, like to hand-grabbing range, but even birds, they'd manage to get away. I guess birds come for the fish and then you just grab the bird or something. After 2 months, Alvarenga was alright, relatively speaking, but this Cordoba, who was younger and stuff, he wasn't doing very well mentally, and so he'd sort of like started refusing to eat, sort of broken. Mm-hmm. And then eventually he died, for obvious reasons.
Just of starvation.
Yeah, essentially. Starvation, sickness, lost the will to live as well, probably didn't help, like just basically giving up.
Yeah.
Because the other guy had also gone a bit mad by this point. He just propped him up and just kept having conversations with him for about a week, even though he was dead. And then realised, hang on, this is crazy. And threw him overboard. So apparently he didn't eat him. So, guess that's good. So he's only 2 months in. And so now for another year, he literally just floated through. And like, apparently sometimes he'd see like... cargo ships and stuff, and he'd try waving and stuff at them, but they're just, because it's such a small boat, there's like nothing even sticking up out, like being impossible to spot, like unless you bounced into it, like there's no way like anyone would see it. So that was it. So there was nothing. He reckons he saw 20 ships, but none of them ever saw him. The
first time you see a ship, you must think you're saved, and then that heartbreaking realisation when they disappear off the horizon.
And then apparently he just sort of retreated into his mind to sort of keep himself... It's weird. To keep himself sane, he basically went crazy.
Yeah.
He said he made up like an alternate world that he lived in. So he'd walk up and down this little boat, but he'd like in his head, he'd be pretending he's going like on a big walk around like a park or, like up and down the beach or something like that. And like every time he ate, he'd pretend like in his head that he was having like an amazing meal and stuff like that. And apparently also experienced the most delicious sex. Because you gotta have something to keep you going.
Not to make it crass, but what did he use to simulate that?
It doesn't go into detail.
Okay, I'm guessing a fish.
There's a reason why all sailors were apparently enticed by mermaids and stuff.
Grossed out by the top half.
Yeah. So he literally did that, and then eventually opened, like one day he just saw like an island on the horizon and he was drifting towards it. At first he thought he was hallucinating it. And then he was like, nope, this seems to be real. So he actually got like, rather than waiting to wash up, like in case he did, he jumped out of the boat when he thought he was close enough and swam like the rest.
Fuck.
Not like massively far, but like he was literally like, I'm getting to this, but like I'm getting to land one way or another.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, he had no idea. It was just like a little island. Yeah, like literally it says here, like he, because he saw it and he was getting close, and then he started panicking that he would, blow, the current would take him further away. And then he just lay in the sand. And then apparently literally just crawled along the beach into like, like up the beach and into the forest or whatever. And then it turns out he'd washed up on Tile Islet, which is the southern tip of the Marshall Islands.
Oh, right.
And it's one of the most remote spots on Earth. But it was inhabited.
Good.
He was walking around and then there was a couple living there. Emile Libokmeto and Russell Lackadrick. So they saw this random guy just basically stumbling through being like a delirious, starving guy. And they were just like, what the hell is going on here? Yeah, and they didn't speak Spanish. I don't know what they speak in the Marshall Islands, but he didn't speak that. But eventually they were like, they took him in their boat to one of the bigger islands where there was actually like a little village and town or whatever. And then they were able to get him a doctor. We did that, and then eventually, yeah, that was it. He was saved.
Any, like, long-term physical damage? I'm sure mentally.
Well, he had, like, liver poisoning or kidney issues because he'd essentially had a very salty diet. And they think he might have had, like, parasites and stuff because, again, all raw fish.
Yeah.
And then mentally, he was, he was terrified of the water and couldn't sleep and stuff like that.
Did he move back to Mexico, or?
He moved back to El Salvador, his original thing. Mm-hmm. But then he did go back to Mexico because he'd promised to tell the other guy's mum what had happened.
Oh, that's
so
nice.
He did that.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah. Heartbreaking, but yeah. But apparently he just really didn't want the attention and stuff, so apparently he put a post-it note in his hospital room saying, like, please go away. Like,
yeah.
Stop asking. Because obviously, like, the world's media descended on this because they're like... Because at first people were sceptical. How has anybody survived that long and stuff like that? But, like, he was reported missing, like, a year and a bit before, so they were like, holy shit, like, this is the guy.
Yeah.
Realised it was true. And then everyone wanted to know, but yeah.
But we're unlikely to get a sort of 127 hours style film out of it.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's just Castaway / Life of Pi.
Oh, yeah. Seen it. Been done.
So, yeah. So ends that tale. Okay, and so with that tale out the way, what's your second topic?
Okay, well, I'm going to move back to familiar ground and old touchstone, ancient Greece.
Oh, yes, another one.
Yet another one to the pyre. I'll ask you a question. What's Plato's real name?
Plato?
That's what I thought. No one knows his real name. Plato is his wrestling name, and that's the name that has survived the centuries.
Oh, so it'd be like in 2,000 years if everyone refers to The Rock. And everyone's like,
yeah.
what was his real name? And everyone's like, no idea. The name Dwayne Johnson will be lost to time, and everyone will refer to President of the United States, The Rock.
Yeah, well, not only that, not only The Rock, but also one of the 21st century's greatest thinkers, philosophers, teachers, but also physically imposing. So Plato just means broad in Greek.
Oh.
He was an Olympic gold wrestler as well as a thinker type. Even in Aristotle's notes, who was obviously a student of Plato, apparently he'd do this thing that if he was losing a debate in front of a crowd, he'd just get up and start flexing and everyone would cheer.
Such a dick move.
And he'd sort of just win the debate. You're like,
oh, well, no, I really want to have President The Rock because it's in the debates and it's just like, so Mr. The Rock, what's your taxation policy? He rips his shirt off and just lets everyone goes, yes!
Oh, let's be honest, he'd already be in a sleeveless suit.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Just sort of flexing, like from the West Coast, right over to the East Coast, just over there. This massive bicep, boom, that is electrical dynamite. So yeah, so he used to literally just say if, I don't know, like, his debate, like a rival was winning, he'd just start flexing in a kytone.
So really, are we even sure that Plato was that smart? Did he just beat all the nerds into submission and everyone just had to be like, oh shit. Everyone just had to write about how clever Plato was. He actually didn't know anything, but he beat up all the other nerds and took the homework.
Well, we've discussed before how he was against written language because it diluted the purity of speech. I'm starting to think he couldn't write. And he was just, like you say, a jock who was just like, right, you write it then. Right, okay, Steve. Don't call me Steve. Call me Broad. Call me. All right, and then the hench philosopher argued in favour of the Republic while deadlifting an ox.
Just puts everything in perspective.
Well, yeah, here's the thing, right? We think of, I don't know, the nobility of Athenian democracy, the grand ideas that lay the foundation for, sort of Western civilization. And it's less like sort of dignified, let's admit, men in like crowded, marketplaces and forums, like bringing enlightenment to the common people. It's basically WWE.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's walking out, he's flexing and lunging and talking smack about his sort of debating rival. It's like it's far less like high-minded than I originally thought.
Well, that's it. I feel like a lot of these things get, like, ancient Greece and Rome always get sort of, like, whitewashed into a sort of... I mean, also kind of literally, because apparently, like, all the statues and stuff were actually, like, painted. So, like, it's always, like, in our heads...
Really gaudy, colourful as well.
Yeah. And in our heads, it's always sort of, like, these, like, Athens and Rome and stuff, were all these, like, cities of just glittering white marble. Not that one, really. They would have been painted, like, pink and red and blue and all these, like, you say, all these crazy colours. Yeah, and then again, like, we're sort of like, oh yes, and they were very dignified, and it was the foundations of civilization and the world. And then, yeah, back and then, like, it's like we're saying, like, about Caesar when we talk about Rome, like, when everyone, in debating him, people would just be like, yeah, well, I heard you got bummed. Like, like, in our heads, it's
Caesar
this,
takes
like,
it up the arse from the Nicomedes.
Yeah, that was it. And it was like in our heads, it's like, oh yeah, well, it would have been dignified and they would have just used the foundations of modern thought and all this. And then, like, yeah, it's actually just a bunch of jocks yelling at each other and being like, "Wait, come on!"
Not to make it political, he says, which is what people say before they make it political.
Mm-hmm.
But you know how a certain aspect of the sort of media on the right almost like fetishize ancient Greece, particularly about Sparta. But also, like ancient Greeks loved like debauchery and like poetry and plays, like stuff particularly, associated with like a sort of liberal sort of thing. But it's like all the Greeks that have survived through history are just basically sort of, I don't know, sort of drunken sort of liberal aristocracy, you know what I mean? Yeah. It's just like Plato, like known for like just getting drunk at parties and stuff like that. They call them forums, but that's basically just famous people talking about, well, they're just, shagging and cover themselves in oil, and then Aristotle comes out the next day wearing Plato's Olympic medals, and everyone knows what's gone on.
It always gets an air of dignity that probably would not have been warranted. Like
that they would have actively laughed at.
Yeah, especially like in contrast, like the Romans get a bit of a like, well, they were like the Greeks, but sort of like rough and violent and stuff like that. And then like the ancient Greeks were like, we're going to have boxing, but we're going to have gloves with like leather gloves with metal studs on them, so it really breaks people's jaws. So everyone's like, yes, dignity. It's like, welcome to the Olympic Games. We've got boxing with metal, like with knuckle dusters.
We've got chariot racing where people will get crushed. We've got wrestling where it is completely, permissible to drop people on their necks, and the crowd will love it.
Yeah, no. It's, they say the dignity it gets afforded seems a bit unwarranted for what it would have been like.
Yeah, so it's less like togas and high-minded speeches. It is just Plato in SmackDown, on a tag team match against, whoever.
We, Cooking with Grief, have shed new light onto how Plato's, like, mental prowess. I think there's an avenue to dig down here and to find out, was Plato as smart as people think, or did he just beat up other people and take their homework? Like, Plato's broad, there's probably some, like, ancient Greek whose nickname was Skinny, who actually came up with all of these things, and then every time they'd be like, yeah, parable of the cave, eh? Be a shame if somebody beat you up and took that. It's like, oh, fine, here you go, have it. Just don't break my nose again.
Yeah, Plato!
Oh, man, I love that.
Right, well, I think on that very scientific and academic note, let's hear your final topic to round us out.
All right, Chris, so I'm going to ask you a question. What do you know about Schrodinger's cat?
I know a bit and nothing at all at the same time.
Nicely done. For any listeners who aren't aware, and I am merely an engineer, so I am a studier of physics, slower younger brother. So I apologise for anybody if I butcher this explanation. But it's basically a thought experiment, which was, if you've got a cat in a box, I don't know why, it made it really overly complicated. Like in the original thought experiment, it's like there's a cat in a box and there's a radioactive isotope in a vase that will decay at a certain... It's like, just say there's a cat in a box with a piece of poison in it. That'll do. So yeah, cat in a box with some poison. If the cat's eaten the poison, the cat's dead. If the cat hasn't eaten the poison, the cat's alive. But because you can't tell until you open the box, you've got to assume that the cat is both alive and dead at the same time.
And what does that thought experiment explain?
Something to do with quantum physics. I can't really fully explain what because I don't understand quantum physics, but it's essentially like particles and stuff like that can be in two states. Weirdly enough, the guy who came up with this, Schrodinger, was using this to ridicule what a ridiculous idea it was, because he was like, cats can't be alive and dead at the same time. Because it's this idea that there are certain particles and stuff that until you look at them, they could be one thing or they could be something else, and you can't know until you look at them. Because
they act differently depending on whether or not they're observed.
Yeah, which I've never fully understood how that works, but yeah, like observing them can change. So it was really weird. It's like light works as a particle. I don't think this is explained by Schrodinger's cat thing, but light works as a particle or a wave depending on what you do into it. It's both at the same time. You can do experiments that prove that it's a particle, you can do experiments that prove it's a wave, and you can do the same article and tweak it slightly and it changes from a wave to a particle. It's mad.
My side bonus fact, you know how both on this podcast and in real life I'll take any opportunity to wax lyrical about my favourite band, Eels?
Yes.
Eels is essentially the creative output of one guy called Mark Everett, whose dad, Hugh Everett III, was a physicist who first posed the quantum worlds theory based on this very idea that if particles acting in different ways, and again, don't quote me on this, then every decision we make has a quantum counter-reaction where something else happens.
Okay. What, so there's like a mirror universe?
Yeah, so like he invented the multi-universe theory.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, had very little time for bringing up a son who would go on to make my favourite album of all time.
Oh, well, there we go. Cause and effect. Yeah, so now what they've found is that not only is the cat alive and dead at the same time, scientists have found that the cat can start dying and then you can bring it back to life, metaphorically.
Fine line between quantum mechanics and necromancy.
Yes.
Which side are we on?
I want to say we're on the side of necromancy, but also physics. Yeah, so the idea is now that they found that this jump between quantum states, which was thought to be instantaneous, like you look at it and then it's going to either be one thing or another, it's either going to be alive or dead straight away. They found it actually happens very fast, but not instantaneously, which means that you could open the box and see the cat dying, to go back to the metaphor, but you could see that it's about to die, and then you can reverse the transition midway through, so you can, effectively stop the jump as well.
By closing the box?
Yes, essentially. Close the box again, and the cat will go back to being alive and dead at the same time. You could open the box really fast and, when you try to open the fridge and close the fridge but keep the light on. You see how far you can close the fridge whilst the light stays on. So essentially you can do that. Physics. I forgot what we're talking about.
Schrodinger's cat.
Schrodinger's fridge.
It's Chris's fridge.
Honestly, all these physics things, it was because I liked physics at school, and I was considering, when it's coming to choosing universities and stuff, I was like physics was my best subject, so I was like, do physics, and then I was like, engineering. I ended up choosing engineering because engineering is the bits of physics that for the most part you can sort of visualize in your head. There'll be a load of maths and stuff behind it and a load of formulas that boggle your mind, but for the most part you can think alright, if I put a weight on the end of this, either end's gonna move, and it's you can sort of visualize it. It's
practical physics rather than hypothetical.
Yeah. And then I was looking at the type of stuff they do at university in physics, and I was just my brain just melted. It's just right, we're going to talk about, So all this maths really makes sense and proves that everything works out you can predict things with mathematical certainty to whatever. But for it to work, we have to assume that there's also dimensions that you can't see. It's what? It's it works perfectly.
What I find interesting about physics, particularly at school, is it's the only subject where they teach you one thing and then the next year they say, when we taught you that thing, well, that's not quite true. It's actually more like this. And then next year it's it's like that, but there's actually it sort of doesn't quite work like that. It's not like in French, after 2 years, they say, you know, all those irregular verbs. Well, it's not quite like that. It's more like this.
Yeah.
And it's like, it doesn't keep, like, pulling the rug out under from you. It's like, it's not actually a chemise, it's more of a blouson. And you're like, what?
Because obviously, like most schools, we had teachers of varying quality. Like, the physics
What a diplomatic way of saying that.
Yeah, but like the physics teacher I had at A levels, he'd actually worked like, you know, because some teachers, you know, they literally went straight from like school to university, couldn't think of a job or something, and were like, oh, I'll just go back to school. And like, you ask them any question that isn't like written in the textbook, and they're like, nah, sorry, like, well, they won't ever say they don't know the answer, they can't answer. They just say you don't need to know that or something like that. And you're just like, oh, wow. Okay. Whereas this guy, he'd actually worked as like an astrophysicist in like you know, like in observatories and stuff like that. Like I think he worked in South Africa or somewhere at some like high altitude observatory for ever many years. You know, so he knew all this stuff. And sometimes they'd ask him a question or whatever, and he'd be like, right, the answer you need to know is this. Memorize this answer. The real answer is this. And you go into some elaborate thing about like how, like, you know, I don't know, just, you know, how everything you think you know isn't real. Something like that. But he'd be like...
And this is why the universe is actually a snail on top of a turtle, and it's turtles all the way down. And you're like, okay, so what's the answer to 2B?
Yeah.
And he's like, 7. But you show you're working.
Yeah.
Like,
well,
what?
Well, that's the thing, because he'd be like, whatever you do not write this answer down in the exam because they'll say it's wrong. Like, this is the real answer, but it's far too complicated for, like, A-level. Write down...
a 5-mark question, yeah.
He'd be like, just write down this, memorize this, and write it down in the exam. But the real answer is a lot more interesting, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, like, and then 4 massive, like, chalkboards, like, covered in, like, spirals and diagrams and, like, red tape connecting the things. It's like, but on a subparticle level, and it's like, what?
Yeah, and the answer is 12. If anybody asks, just say the answer's 12. And I know why. Like, they can't teach physics and stuff. Like, imagine if you went into your first lesson like, on electricity in year 7, and they were like, right, well... And then just like 18 pages of equations. Just like, I give up. It's a lot easier if they just go like, electrons move around from here to here instantly. There you go. You turn the switch, it turns on. Light
Shut up.
Yeah.
But didn't you get to uni to do aeronautical engineering, and the first lesson is no one knows why planes work?
Yeah.
Or there are at least competing theories of why planes work.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
there's not
what? I'm 18 years old.
Yeah, it's quite a thing where you go to study a particular branch of science for that branch of science to say we don't actually know how it works. Like, the theory that everyone gets taught is definitely wrong. The theory that's usually taught to people in the simple thing is like planes have like the wings have a curved surface on the top and a straight line on the bottom. And the straight line's shorter distance than the curve, which means that if a particle goes over the top and over the bottom, like the one going over the top has to speed up so that it meets back at the other time. And then I remember a lecturer being like, I call this the cup of coffee theory because why would the particles need to meet up again? Like, do they have a coffee meetup scheduled? Why would it know that it needs to be there at the same time? And then there's like some other theories about it, and it's, yeah. And the ways you can explain it, which make the maths work and prove how it all works out, but don't actually explain why it's happening. How you can measure it and how you can like adapt it, but doesn't explain why. So yeah, competing theories.
Whereas I got to uni and they didn't, like, I did Chinese and I didn't get that. And they go like, despite what you may have heard, China is actually an ancient Australian civilization and they're just speaking English in a really funny accent. It's like, no, it's like, it's the thing you expect. Yeah. So here's a question. I read a thing once that said people don't know why bees can fly. Is that true?
No. There's a thing with that. I'm not going to say definitively because I don't know the answer. But, like, I'm not saying that the science is definitive on why bees can fly. But there's a common thing where, like, you know, there's a common thing saying bees shouldn't be able to fly. It defies all physics. But it's basically a bunch of calculations based on if bees were planes, which they're quite clearly...
Oh, right.
You know, it's like their wings aren't big enough to support their weight. And it's like, assuming that their wings were fixed horizontally and they had engines that powered them forward, they wouldn't make enough lift to fly, which obviously ignores the fact that bees flap their wings really fast. So I'm not going to say, because I don't know the answer, if how bees fly is definitively answered, but like the common, not meme, but you know what I mean, like
It's a trope.
yeah, common trope that
Yeah.
the physics of bees don't make any sense, or like bees flying don't make any sense, and that's been discredited because all the calculations that apparently prove it assume that bees' wings work like a plane's wings when they clearly don't.
Yeah, fuck them, they're only bees.
Who needs them? Turns out everybody. So I don't even eat honey, but I do like to breathe oxygen, and they help with that.
Big fan of fruit and veg.
Mostly spinach for you.
Well, only by the kilo. I realised we went off on a bit of a tangent there. Anything else on the actual topic itself of Schrodinger's cat 2.0?
Yeah, no, it's just that they've, that's all that this article
They've
goes
patched
into.
it.
But yeah, just that Schrodinger's cat thought experiment has been modified slightly according to these scientists. And
do you know where this is from?
Dr. Zlatko Minev from Yale University, who's the key author of the work, although he does also have a team, but it doesn't say what their names are. It's a weird thing with all these scientific experiments is like, especially nowadays, but even going back, like almost all science is like a team effort. But we still got this weird thing of only wanting to credit one person with stuff. Because there's always somebody who gets written out of history. Like, there's the people who found DNA, evidence of DNA.
Like before Crick and Watson.
Yeah, here we go.
Or Crick and Watson are the ones on the paper.
Yeah, Crick and Watson are the ones that get the thingy. And then there's Rosalind Franklin, who was also key in finding it, but she's never credited with it. And there's loads of ones where, like, throughout history, where, like, if it's like done in like a PhD dissertation thing, it's like the supervising lecturer or whatever gets I can't remember what the name is for it, but they're the ones that get the credit. Even if it was all their students that did like all the work, like they still get their name on it. And it's really weird, like, I don't know, it's really weird obsession with crediting just one person it's like that great man theory of history, like where history is written sort of from the perspective of a few great men did things rather than like millions of other people all contributing. It's kind of like that. It's like a weird obsession where like one person will get the credit, even if it. And like I say, it's always been that way, but especially now, it's so complicated that like, if you were to make a discovery somewhere, one person might come up with the theory, then you'd have like 10 all writing the theory and expanding it, and then you'd have like hundreds and hundreds of people making like an experiment to make it work, and then they'll give the Nobel Prize to one person. Yeah, there you go. This is weird.
Yep.
But anyway, that's me off my soapbox.
No, it's a fine soapbox.
Okay, so with that, we have wrapped up our odyssey of interesting and wonderful facts. As promised, we did take you from science to history. Don't think we quite covered art, but actually, I suppose we did cover art. We talked about Plato's wrestling, and wrestling is an art. Oh, and the statues, that's a more obvious link.
No. The way his rippling delts flexed with oil is an art in itself.
True art. Exactly. So thank you for listening, as ever. Hopefully we've broadened your mind. I learned something. Did you learn something?
Yeah.
Yeah, well there we go. We both learned something. What more do you want for a podcast? For free.
What more do you want?
I think we're pretty good value for money, I'm just saying.
You've got to stop being so defensive with the listeners who probably weren't feeling shortchanged until you started. What are you still here for? Fuck off. What do you want?
Well, apparently there's like a bit of a, within the... I've never actually seen it happen. Actually, I think I've seen it once on Twitter. But there's like a bit of a stereotype of the indie podcaster getting annoyed that they haven't instantly become famous and basically then taking it out on their listeners for not paying enough attention. It's just like I don't know. Just imagine that, just being like, how dare you not listen to me? We put so much effort into this. And it's like, well,
we've brought out 3 whole episodes.
Yeah, why are we not millionaires?
Right.
Honestly, if any generous benefactors do want to give us loads of money, then let us know
or even a little bit to our Patreon.
Oh yeah. We do have a Patreon.
Doesn't have to be a multi-millionaire benefactor.
No.
It could be a couple of quid our way.
Yeah, well, we do have we currently only have one tier on Patreon, and that's the what do we call it? You're a Saint. That's it. It's called the You're a Saint tier, and you just throw us $1 a month and you get nothing in return.
Except the bi-monthly podcast that you already receive / enjoy.
Exactly. But you do get our gratitude.
Yeah, we will put in 1% more effort.
Yeah, and I mean, we do have a couple of our friends Courtney and Henry on that tier. So big thanks to them for keeping us going through these lean times. I mean, like I say, if anybody here does want to give us money, feel free, and we'd greatly appreciate it. And we do want to become rich and famous enough to quit our day jobs and do this full time. But you know, when people are like, "Oh, give us, send us some money, and it will really help us like improve the channel and stuff," it's like, how? like, what are you buying with this money? Like, you already have the microphone. You already have like, what are you going to do that's going to actually like directly benefit from this money? So at least we're honest. That's the point. Cooking with Greed. We may not be the best, but we are honest. Put that on the poster.
What poster?
I don't know. Why can't Spotify give us like $1 million deal like they have with, I say, like they have with Joe Rogan? What is it? It's 100 million. Just give us some. Come on, Spotify. Cough up.
You started off by saying how ridiculous you find it, people being indignant for not giving them money, and then you just shouted, Spotify, cough up. The entitlement. Oi! He's got his. Where's mine?
Yeah, where's mine? What's Joe Rogan got that we don't, besides a massive fan base and like legions of celebrity guests? Tell you what, we have that he doesn't. Hair.
Well, you do. I'm as bald as a peach.
Anyway.
Yeah, 50% of us has got one thing that Joe Rogan hasn't, so... Yeah, you enjoy that 100 million from Spotify. We'll comb our hair. Who's laughing now?
Exactly.
Not I. And not our listeners.
No. But, on that note, thank you for listening. Thank you for making it this far. We're actually coming up to nearly 2 years doing this, you know. I realised the other day. I think in September we will have done 2 years. We started recording, because obviously we built up a bit of a back catalogue before we launched. We started recording about this time 2 years ago. I think in April, 2 years ago in April, we came up with the concept. And I think it was about now. And I bought a microphone and we started recording. And then I think we launched in start of September. So yeah.
Wow, that's gone quick.
Exactly. So maybe we'll do something special for episode 50. Because that should come out about 2 years in.
Yeah, I've got a few things in mind for... Because, 50 seems like... To do 50 of anything, 50 sit-ups, 50...
Push-ups.
Yes, yeah. Just go through all the exercises. 50 bicep curls, 50 reverse bicep curls.
So, anyway, stay tuned for that.
We should say goodbye.
Let's wrap this up. Yeah. So, again, thank you for listening. Feel free to give us money if you want, but don't feel obliged. Unless you're Spotify, in which case, cough up. And more importantly than that...
Joe Rogan's bald.
Yeah. But just more importantly than that, we really would like it if you left a review on iTunes, because that just helps the channel to grow. Honestly, it doesn't even need to be a positive review. We'd prefer it if it was. But even negative reviews, I think, do actually boost your visibility.
Even a confusing review. Yeah. Just like copy and paste the word, I don't know, quiche Lorraine 50 times. Yeah. It all counts.
It all counts. So yeah, no, we'd really appreciate that. And we'd also like if you followed us on Twitter, because we do like to interact with our fans. That's it, really. So again, thank you for listening.
That's at Cooking with Grief, by the way.
Oh yeah, no G on cooking.
And it's goodbye from me.
Yeah. Ciao.
Adios.
Auf Wiedersehen.
再见.
Au revoir.
Fuck. Ciao. Oh, no, have you already said that?
Done that one.
Goodbye, mate.
Sayonara.
Ah, damn, yeah. No, you win.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.
All right, everybody on the train, all aboard. You snooze, you lose.
Buy my loot boxes.
Not you. Get off the train. Don't let him on.
Oh, okay.
All right, listen here, Greenhorn. I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about how to conduct a podcast. First thing you need to know is never stay on topic ever.
Sir.
What do you want?
People are complaining about the Venom movie still.
I don't care. Feed them Justice League or something. Get them off my back.
Copy.
Sir, it says in the book that you need to stay on topic as a podcast.
Screw the book, Greenhorn. The book was written by dinosaurs. Second thing you need to know is never report news that's not at least 2 or 3 weeks old.
Sir.
What do you want?
People are complaining about the Pokemon Go update.
I don't care. Just gag them or something. Shut them up.
On it.
Sir,
What do you want, Greenhorn?
I think the train might be going off the rails.
That's exactly how we run this show. This is the Crazy Train of Thought podcast, brought to you by the Idiot Savants. Find us anywhere you listen to podcasts.
www.crazytrainofthought.com.